Early in the morning, my aunt's scream woke me as she cared for us. I got up and saw her crying, saying that she had just seen a woman who had appeared to her, a woman coming out of that forbidden room, that locked room that no one could open. She saw her come out. She was just a few steps away. It wasn't anyone alive. The stories and tales we're going to hear tonight, everyone, are the kind that will feel close to home. And I say that very intentionally with these words. A home can be inhabited not only by the family, not only by the living. It's possible that there are ghosts who haven't realized they're no longer here physically, who refuse to leave, whether consciously or unconsciously. There are entities that decide to enter there, even if they've never occupied it, even if they've never been alive. And that's something you have to be careful about, because they're going to feed on all the fear, desperation, and sadness they can cause us. There are many different possibilities for us to say that a house is haunted, infested, or possessed, but all of them are equally terrifying. I'm really glad you're here listening to us again, and I hope you're ready for what's coming. Close your eyes and let yourself go unless you're at home. In that case, listen carefully and stay very alert, and under no circumstances play the following stories at a volume that something else can hear. If that's the case, you might be the next protagonist of Stories of the Night. I moved to Mexico City a few years ago after landing a good job at an office in the Reforma area. Since I didn't have much of a budget, at first I started looking for a room to rent. Something simple, but hoping it would be as well located as possible. My schedule would have me leaving very late or arriving very early, so I wanted something as close to my job as possible. I saw a Facebook post from a family renting a room to women in their San Miguel Chapultepec home. The price was more than reasonable, right within my budget, and it was close to the subway. The room already had a bed, desk, and a small television. Also, the lady who showed it to me said they were rarely home due to their family business in Toluca, so it seemed perfect to me. A quiet place, almost always just for myself without much hassle. I reserved it and moved in that same week. The first night was typical. I had trouble sleeping as usual in new houses, but noticed nothing strange. It was on the second night when I heard the footsteps. They weren't loud footsteps or anything noisy. On the contrary, they sounded soft, as if someone was walking barefoot down the hallway. I thought one of the owners had come back to the house without telling me, so I peeked out the door to say hello, but there was no one there. Everything was dark and silent. I went back to my room and told myself it must have been my imagination. But the next day, when I went to sleep in my room, at the same time, again. And the next night, too. It was strange. They always sounded at the same time, between 11 and 12, the time when I was going to sleep. Someone walking slowly down the hallway. Sometimes they would stop right next to my door. Sometimes it seemed like they were going down the stairs. One weekend I decided to ask the lady directly if someone else lived there, if there was another tenant I hadn't noticed before. If someone visited the house to take care of it, maybe a family member or a neighbor. But she told me no, that it was only the people I already knew, her husband, her daughter, and herself, and that when she wasn't at home, the house was empty. I told her about the footsteps I heard. She looked serious and said they sometimes heard them too, but never saw anything. that maybe it was the change in temperature in the wood or the old pipes. It's an old house after all, but I feel like she said it without sounding completely convinced. And the fact that there wasn't a logical explanation made me start sleeping with a chair blocking the door and a small lamp always on from that night on. Nothing worse happened to me, but every night I stayed alone in the house without fail. I heard those footsteps, always soft, always slow, as if whatever it was made sure not to make any noise. But it would walk right outside my room. One night I got home later than usual, after 11. I heard as I came in that the footsteps on the second floor were moving a bit faster, as if they were running to hide. There was no one in the house, so I was surprised when I went upstairs and saw the daughter's bedroom door open. And they never left them like that. I didn't check, but I'm almost sure they always kept them locked. As I walked by, I stopped for a moment and looked inside the room. There wasn't any light on, but the light from the window coming through a gap in the closed curtains let me see something on the bed. I could swear it was a board with letters. You already know what I mean. I was there for 3 months, then I found a shared apartment with some friends from work and I moved out. I never dared to ask them again if they really knew what was going on, and even less to confirm if what they had in that room was a board. I'm going to take the time to tell you something that happened to me a few years ago when we rented a house that was supposed to be an improvement for our family. After living for a long time in apartments in somewhat complicated areas, we had finally found a house in a quieter neighborhood with houses pretty far apart from each other, little traffic, and much more peace. It was an old house for sure, one of those that had clearly been remodeled several times without a specific plan, but that has that old charm, well taken care of. They rented it to us at a good price, which seemed like a very good sign to us at the time. I arrived a few days early to move in heavy furniture with help from friends who, like me, always help each other out. It's one of our youth pacts that we still honor. Everything was going smoothly with the move, but at one point while we were carrying up a dresser, one of my friends looked at me strangely and said, "Hey, I think there's a man inside your house." It looked like he peeked out over there by that door. He pointed out a small door at the end of the hallway. I asked what he looked like, and he said it was a dark-skinned, gray-haired man who didn't seem like a worker or neighbor. He saw him briefly before he went inside. He asked if it could have been the landlord, maybe bringing papers for me to sign or something similar. But I told him that all of that was already settled, and besides, the person who rented the place to me was a woman. I went to check. I walked over to that door I hadn't really noticed before. It was a door between the dining room and the stairs, made of old wood, painted white like the wall, without a handle and sealed shut. Looking closer, I realized it was really sealed, not just closed, because there was a wall behind it. A false entrance, as if it had ever led anywhere. But surely it hadn't for many years. I didn't want to make a big deal, or maybe just lacked the time. I told him he was probably mistaken, that maybe it was just a reflection or a passing neighbor, and we continued with the move. A few days later, my wife and daughters moved in, and we began living a normal life in that house. It was cool and quiet. We heard no strange noises or felt anything unusual, at least at first. A few weeks passed until my youngest daughter, who was 4 at the time, she started mentioning that there was a man in the house. She said he talked to her. Sometimes she told us he just greeted her. Other times, that he asked her to go with him. At the hallway door, yes, the same door that was sealed that only had a wall behind it. It might sound a bit macabre, but we thought it was something normal for her age, a fantasy built from something as curious as that. A door that led nowhere, that seemed straight out of a children's story, like Coraline or something like that. That's why we told her it was just her imagination, that nothing was wrong, and she gradually stopped mentioning it. Maybe because she lost interest, or maybe because she noticed we weren't paying attention to her, but either way, life went on. We lived in that house for 4 years, without any major incidents until we moved, and this time, it wasn't just to another house in the city. We had to repack everything. Just like the first time, my friends helped me move the heavier furniture and load up the truck I had rented. Everything was almost ready. It was nighttime, and we were closing up the truck with the last things. When I turned around for a moment, I saw something community. Someone in the window of my daughter's room. It was a man, dark-skinned, with completely white hair, still, not blurry, not a shadow. I saw him very clearly, as if he were a real person, watching us from inside. The moment he noticed I was looking at him, he moved, walked inside. I saw him vanish into the darkness of the house. I dropped what I was holding and ran to check. I went back into the house, searched every room and every corner, nothing, no one. Everything was completely empty. My daughter's room, living room, bathroom, and backyard. There was no one else but me and my friends at the entrance, keeping watch. That's when I realized that what my friend had seen when he arrived wasn't his imagination, that it wasn't made up either about my daughter. That presence lived with us all those years. It really was there. From the beginning, it never hurt us. It never showed itself in a violent way, but it was there, watching, present. It scares me a lot to think about why it was calling my daughter. What I'm left with is thinking that for 4 years, we shared our home with someone else, with a ghost, with someone who never wanted to or couldn't leave. Hello, community. I'm Sebastian, 24, and I've only been listening to night stories for a few months. I dare to send this because nothing has ever happened to me in my life that marked me as much as what we went through that night. And I say we went through because I wasn't the only one, and that makes it more real, more macabre for me. This was almost 6 years ago when we finished high school. A friend of ours, Mario, found a country house to rent for a weekend. It was on the edge of a small town, about an hour from the city. The idea was to spend a couple of days, celebrate the end of an era, and be together one last time before everyone went their separate ways. There were, if I'm not mistaken, 14 of us from the same group, but there were also 2 or 3 people we didn't know that well. The house was big, one of those single-story ones with lots of rooms, very old but comfortable, and it was far from town, completely surrounded by countryside. We arrived in the afternoon, got settled in, grilled some meat, played music, talked. Everything was fine. We drank little that night so we could get up early for breakfast in town and make the most of the day. Besides, we'd already had the big drinking party with everyone else. We went to bed around 1 or 2, more or less. That's when it all started. Andrea and Luciana went to the girls' room with 6 others. They fell asleep a bit later because they stayed up talking. But just a few moments after they had fallen asleep, something strange woke them up. According to them, they were at that point between sleep and wakefulness when they clearly saw a little girl enter the room. A little girl came in as if it were the most normal thing, as if she lived there, and lay down between two of the girls who were already fast asleep. Andrea said she felt like it was a dream, but that something was wrong, that she wanted to get up, but she couldn't. And Luciana said the same thing, like it was sleep paralysis, like the dead were sitting on their chest, but without knowing it, to both of them at the same time. Each one saw the girl. Each one thought the other was asleep. The strangest thing is that one of the girls next to whom the supposed girl lay woke up that morning with a horrible smell stuck in her nose. She said it smelled rotten and thought maybe it was something left over from the food, but no one else smelled anything. That wasn't the only thing that happened that night. Pato and Moni stayed in the living room talking a bit longer. They had been dating all through high school until the previous semester, and that night they stayed up talking for a long time. They were saying goodbye. They said that when everyone was already asleep, when there wasn't a single sound in the house, they saw a woman walk by. She came out of an empty room at the back and walked toward the men's room. At first, they thought it was one of the girls going to see some of the guys with interesting intentions or something like that. But then they realized that this woman was wearing a long dress, one of those old-fashioned ones, a light-colored dress with little dots. And none of the girls were dressed like that. They went to look into the men's room and everyone was asleep. No one had moved. They were snoring. They saw this, but they didn't dare to tell anyone. We didn't leave that house on the outskirts of town until we went to have breakfast at a recommended place. One of those makeshift restaurants that people set up under some tarps by the side of the road. There, everyone dared to talk about what they had gone through the night before, what they had all felt, but some talked about what they had seen. That's when I told them something I hadn't wanted to say. When we got back from dinner in town the night before, I was the first to arrive in my car, alone. As soon as I parked it, I saw something. On the porch of the house, in the darkness, I saw silhouettes. I can't say clearly, but I swear I saw shapes. Several. And what made me know that I wasn't imagining it, that it wasn't pareidolia, it was the eyes of each silhouette that were shining. I don't know how to explain it. It was as if they reflected the light like a cat's eyes. I got really scared, but then the others arrived. They got out laughing and making noise, and I didn't see anything anymore. And I didn't want to mention it either. Until that moment, none of us wanted to sound crazy. Nobody wanted to be the only one who had seen or felt something strange. And in there, nobody dared to say what they were feeling, what they had seen. But when we talked about it in that restaurant, by the highway far from the house, we all started to notice that each of us had experienced something different, but all equally strange. The girl who served us, who ran the little restaurant with her mom, stared at us, very serious because she overheard us unintentionally. She asked us where we had stayed. When we told her the name of the road and described the house, she told us something that I still haven't forgotten. She told us that the Romero family used to live there, a couple, the woman's brothers, and their daughter, a little girl. One night, some neighbors saw them return from town and go into their house, but they never came out again. Days passed and no one heard from them. The neighbors got worried. They went to knock on the door. No one answered. They opened the unlocked door and went in. The house was silent, untouched. There were even plates set on the table as if they were about to sit down for dinner. There were no signs of violence, nor that they had left or that anything had been taken. They simply weren't there anymore. Since then, no one lived in that house. The ones around it were gradually abandoned and then slowly fell apart over time. That one was still standing, stronger than ever. They rented it out for the weekend, mostly to people from the city. But it wasn't unusual for them to leave early because they heard things, because they saw things in some cases. Thankfully, we didn't hear or see those horrible things that the lady at the stand told us about. But we saw enough. When we finished breakfast, we went back to the house to get our things, and nobody wanted to be alone, not even for a moment. We left before it got dark. And even though years have passed and we haven't all gotten together again, whenever some of us meet up, that's always the first topic we bring up. The last night we all spent together, the night we spent in a haunted house, a house that no one, not even by mistake, would dare to return to. Thank you for sticking around, community, for being one of those crazy people who make it this far and listen to these stories that other people avoid. Here, we seek them out because we enjoy them, because they make us feel alive. I want you to think for a moment about the last story you heard from someone close to you about a haunted house. It could be a place that is already recognized by the whole family as historically linked to the paranormal. Or it could be one of those stories where, for a day, for a night, the supernatural makes itself present. When something arrives, something occupies it. Think about it, and please, no matter how short it is, consider sharing it with us and send it to miralato@gmail.com, where we will be reading it very carefully, and maybe it will be part of the next collection on this topic. But now it's time to continue. More stories remain tonight. Hello, community. This story I'm about to share is a memory from when I was a child, and I don't know why it's only now that I feel encouraged to write it, to actually tell it. Maybe because I thought no one would believe me, or because over the years I convinced myself that maybe I had imagined everything that might seem paranormal in this story. But no, that's not the case. I grew up in a very quiet house in a neighborhood that was also quiet. It wasn't residential or anything like that. But back then you could go out and play, ride your bike on the street, have go-kart races, that kind of place. I hope there are still some places like that for kids today. My house wasn't one of those that are built with a design and then repeated throughout the neighborhood. But right across from ours, there was an identical one, just mirrored. For as long as I can remember, that house was abandoned, and for all the kids on the street, it was the haunted house. The curtains were always closed. Some windows were broken because kids dared each other to go inside as part of challenges. And even though my parents strictly forbade me from going near it, sometimes I did, just to look from the outside. I once asked if someone lived there, but my mom said no. When they bought our house, it was already like that. They never knew who owned it or why it was empty. Over time, I just got used to having it there in front of us, like part of the scenery, like the shadow in the mirror of our own house. One night when I was about 8 years old, I think I was woken up by my parents' hurried footsteps. I got up and saw them in the living room by the window looking very nervous. I got closer and they didn't notice me. They were looking toward the house across the street. Something was audible. It was the crying of a woman. But it wasn't a normal cry. It was a scream, like of pain, like someone truly suffering. A sad wail, heartbreaking. My dad called the police, and within 5 minutes, a patrol car arrived. I don't know if it was luck or something else. The police officers got out. My dad went out to explain to them what we heard, pointed out the house across the street, and they, without thinking much, went in. From our window, we could see the lights from their flashlights moving inside. They were checking room by room. You could see them passing from one window to another. Until suddenly, another scream was heard, but this time it wasn't from the woman. It was the scream of a man, one of the police officers. Then another scream was heard, and in less than a few seconds, both of them ran out the door, pale, shouting things we didn't understand. My dad crossed the street to check what happened, and a few minutes later, another patrol car arrived. I stayed closer to my mom, but I heard some things they managed to say, what my dad later repeated to a neighbor. Apparently, when they were searching the house, they got to a small room that looked like a utility room. A police officer was about to leave when something brushed his shoulder. He turned, thinking it was his partner, but saw no one. Then he felt another brush, but this time it was different. He said what he felt were feet, hanging at the level of his head, as if someone was floating or hanging from the ceiling. He screamed, ran out, and when the other officer looked in, he said he saw them, that he could see feet hanging, suspended in the air in the room, which they knew was empty. The others went in afterwards to check the whole house, but they didn't find anything, not even any signs that someone had been there. The crying had completely disappeared. After that, the house was silent again. The neighbors discussed the event. Some believed it, while others thought the police were just imagining things. But like time, like everything, it was forgotten. Years passed. I grew up when I was about 15. I remember very well one night when I stayed up late playing on the computer, and around midnight I heard something coming from the living room. I turned everything off. I slowly went to the window, and again, it was the same crying. That same woman's voice crying with such deep sadness that I can't forget it. But this time I didn't go out. No one else in the house woke up. No neighbor turned on a light. No one called the police. I stayed there, standing behind the curtain, listening to that woman. I never told my parents about that. A short time later, that house across the street was demolished. Nobody wanted to buy it, so they built apartments like the ones that now surround our house. On its 3 sides, the whole neighborhood changed. None of the kids I grew up with live there anymore. It has changed so much that I can hardly remember that night, even when visiting my parents. If it weren't for the fact that they remember it too, I would think it was all a dream. A terrible dream. For some reason, this last story has become one of my favorites in a while. Which did you like most from this episode? Remember that a great way to help us is by telling us what you like the most about each episode of Night Stories, and of course, by subscribing. If you haven't done it yet, go ahead. It's free. Become part of this community, the best community on the whole blessed internet. Now let's move on to another story that I really like. Honestly, I like it a lot too, but you will decide which one is the scariest in this episode. I'll also leave you the link in the description to find my book, Relatos de la Noche, a book with 13 horror stories, 14 if you get the special edition, written with all my affection and in a language that will remind you more of Relatos de la Noche, the podcast, than of other horror books. But I think that's part of what has made it so easy to read, what has made it connect so well with you. And honestly, thank you, because thanks to you, we have surpassed 50,000 copies sold. Thank you for accepting it with such love. But we continue with one last story tonight. Hello, community. I'm Beatrice, and this story happened to my family when I was a child. I've always wanted to share it, but only now found the courage. Because ever since I started listening to the podcast, I've realized that there are many people out there who have experienced things that can't be explained and that don't sound so different from what happened to us. This happened when I was 7 years old. My parents moved to a bigger house in a neighborhood that was just starting to get populated near the countryside. It wasn't a new house. It was actually older than the previous one, but it was well maintained, and they saw it as a good opportunity. I liked it from the moment I saw it. It had a backyard, a small garden in the front, and something that at the time didn't seem strange to me. One of the hallway doors was locked, there was no light inside and no windows. My dad told us it was a utility room that we weren't going to use, at least not for now, so I didn't pay much attention to it. Our furniture didn't even fill half the house. We didn't need an extra room. After a few days, we settled in. It was a nice house, very quiet, but over time, things started to happen. At first, silly things, little things that you can explain with logic. Odd noises and footsteps at night that my parents blamed on the roof creaking or neighbors' cats. But things were happening to me that I didn't tell anyone about. Sometimes I would wake up at night feeling like someone had entered my room, like there was someone standing there in the dark. They didn't move, they didn't say anything, but I could feel them. I only dared to turn on my lamp once to check if someone was there, but saw nothing. But that feeling was so strong, so real, that it left me unable to go back to sleep. One time, while I was playing with my dolls in the hallway, I clearly saw the closed door shake, as if someone on the other side was pushing hard. I got up and ran. My mom told me it was probably just a draft, but after that, something changed. My dad, who was always very skeptical, started paying attention to what was happening. One night I heard him tell my mom that he had heard banging coming from inside that room. A few weeks went by like that, and one day they just called a locksmith and they told my brother and me not to go near. My dad and the locksmith spent quite a while forcing the lock, and when they finally managed to open the door, what they found inside surprised them. There were boxes, several boxes, arranged in a very strange formation in the center. I saw just one, but it stayed with me. It was full of women's things, clothes, perfumes, a brush with tangled hair. And there were even photographs, all as old as the items that were there, all torn. It always seemed strange to me, since neither my dad nor my mom ever mentioned a woman, former tenant, or anything like that. Why didn't they share with me what they had found? Why did I have to discover it myself? And of course, I was a child, and they didn't care about scaring me even more with those details. I think it was that night or the next, but I heard my parents talking quietly in the kitchen. They said they found no papers, name, or any clue about who the person was. Strangely, they also found something else in the house. Not in that room, but inside the book my dad was reading. A note, very old, with the ink almost faded, that said, "Don't open the door. Don't let it out." That was all, and it was very strange that something that looked old had suddenly been there. In a book that my dad read every night, he never shared anything with me when I was a child. I only know that my parents locked that room again, but now with a chain on the inside and the outside. Even then, it seemed exaggerated to me. Then they covered the door with a piece of furniture, as if they wanted to forget it was there, but apparently it didn't work. One night, my parents went to a wedding and left us with my aunt, who came to take care of us. Everything was fine, normal, but I noticed she was uneasy all night. My aunt sent us to bed. She stayed because my parents would be getting home around 3 in the morning. I was asleep when I heard her get up for the bathroom. The next thing I remember was hearing her start to scream. She screamed so loud she woke us all up. We found her in the hallway, sitting on the floor, her eyes wide open, trembling. She said there was a woman standing in front of the back door, behind the furniture, who didn't speak to her, who just stared at her, who was only a few steps away from her. My mom took her to the room to rest, and my dad stayed to check, but there was nothing, obviously. Although now I saw something new on the door. 3 scratches, long ones, deeply carved into the wood. After that, like any sane person would have done, my parents decided we couldn't live there anymore, and we moved out in less than a month. It didn't take them long to sell the house at a good price, definitely not as much as it could have sold for, but they tried everything to do it as quickly as possible. They sold it with a warning. There's a very strange room in the house that we can't dare to say can be used. I never learned who bought it, but recently I checked out that house on Google Maps out of curiosity. Is it still there? But now the windows have metal bars, like really old ones. The house is abandoned, the windows are broken, weeds are growing everywhere. At some point, someone lived there for the last time, maybe without knowing it. Maybe someone left thinking they'd figure out how to sell it, how to rent it, at least, but they never did it. And if you ask me, I think it was for the best. I hope that house stays empty forever.